May 23, 1943. The Medjez Plain, Tunisia. The dust hadn't settled from the morning barrage when Hauptmann Friedrich Weber first saw them through his binoculars. 3 dark shapes crawling over the ridge like prehistoric monsters, their silhouettes all wrong against the North African sun. The turrets sat too high. The tracks ran too long. The whole design looked like something a child might draw after being told what a tank was, but never actually seeing one. "What in God's name are those?" Weber muttered to his gunner, Unteroffizier Klaus Zimmermann, as they observed from their Panzer IV hidden in a grove of olive trees, 2,000 yards distant. Zimmermann squinted through his own optics. "British tanks, Herr Hauptmann. The new ones. Intelligence said they're called Churchills." Weber laughed, a short bark of derision that echoed in the Panzer's cramped fighting compartment. "Churchills? They look like tractors with guns bolted on. Look at them lumber along. My grandmother could walk faster." He wasn't exaggerating. Through the shimmering heat haze, the 3 British tanks appeared to be moving at barely 8 miles per hour across the open ground. Their tracks, absurdly long and wrapped entirely around the hull, gave them the appearance of mobile pillboxes rather than fighting vehicles. To Weber, a veteran of Poland, France, and 2 years on the Eastern Front, these machines represented everything wrong with British tank design. Overweight, underpowered, obsolete before they even reached the battlefield. What Weber didn't know, what none of the German tankers positioned along that Tunisian ridgeline could have known, was that he was looking at the tank that would systematically destroy every assumption the Wehrmacht held about armored warfare. Within 10 minutes, those 3 ungainly tractors would demonstrate why the Churchill had earned a nickname among British crews: the tank that just won't die. The morning's events would be documented in extraordinary detail. The British tanks belonged to the North Irish Horse, attached to the 6th Armored Division. Their commander, Major John Anderson, had recorded his thoughts in a combat diary that would later reside in the Imperial War Museum archives. Weber himself would survive the engagement and spend the rest of the war in a British POW camp, where his interrogation reports provided German perspective on what happened that day. But the transformation of German opinion about the Churchill tank didn't begin in Tunisia. It started 18 months earlier, in the bloodied shingle of a French beach town called Dieppe. August 19, 1942. Dieppe, France. The Churchill tank made its combat debut in one of the war's most disastrous operations. 28 Churchills of the Calgary Regiment rolled off landing craft onto the beaches at Dieppe, intended to support Canadian infantry in a raid designed to test German coastal defenses. Within hours, 27 were destroyed or captured, many without firing a shot. Oberleutnant Hans Schreiber of the 302nd Infantry Division was among the first German soldiers to examine a captured Churchill up close. His report, filed with 7th Army Headquarters 3 days after the raid, dripped with contempt. "The British tank is a steel monstrosity without tactical merit," Schreiber wrote. "Its height makes it an excellent target. Its speed is insufficient for maneuver warfare. The armor, while thick, is poorly sloped and thus inefficient. Most significantly, its main armament is a 6-pounder gun that cannot penetrate modern German armor at combat ranges. This vehicle represents British desperation rather than innovation." German intelligence officers photographed the captured Churchills extensively. They measured the armor thickness, 3.5 inches on the turret front, nearly 4 inches on the hull front. Impressive numbers, but the vertical mounting negated much of the benefit. They tested the Vauxhall Bedford Twin 6 engine, 350 horsepower, trying to move nearly 40 tons of steel. The mathematics were brutal. The Churchill's power-to-weight ratio was worse than the Matilda, itself considered dangerously underpowered. The 6-pounder gun, while adequate against earlier Panzers, struggled against the up-armored Mark IVs now equipping German tank battalions. At 500 yards, it might penetrate. Beyond that, British tankers would be throwing expensive ammunition at impervious German steel. Wehrmacht tankers took to calling the Churchill der Britische Traktor, the British tractor. The name spread rapidly through the Afrika Korps as intelligence photos circulated. Here was proof, if any were needed, that British tank design remained hopelessly outdated. While Germany fielded the magnificent Tiger and the lethal Panther, Britain was sending tractors with guns. What the Germans missed, what their intelligence analysis failed to capture, was that the Churchill had never been designed to fight other tanks. It was an infantry support vehicle, built to climb obstacles, cross trenches, and provide mobile firepower to advancing foot soldiers. Its vertical armor made manufacturing simpler and faster. Its low speed kept it moving with infantry. Its heavy tracks distributed weight across soft ground that would bog other tanks. Most critically, that inadequate armor was actually thicker than anything the Germans fielded except the Tiger. And the Churchill carried it all over, sides, rear, even the top deck. There were no weak points, no thin spots that a lucky shot might exploit. But these truths would only become apparent in combat. And in May 1943, as Weber watched those three Churchills lumber across the Tunisian plain, combat was exactly 10 minutes away. The British tanks belonged to Major Anderson's squadron, moving forward to support an infantry advance against German positions around Point 174, a low hill that commanded the approaches to Tunis. Anderson, a 32-year-old solicitor from Belfast in civilian life, had been commanding Churchills for 8 months. He understood his tank's limitations intimately. He also understood its strengths. "The Jerry thinks we're slow," Anderson had told his crew that morning, his Ulster accent thick even over the radio. "He thinks we're vulnerable. He thinks we're targets. Let him think it. Our job is to get close enough that his thinking doesn't matter anymore." Through his periscope, Anderson could see German positions dotting the hillside ahead. At least 2 Panzer IVs, possibly more. Almost certainly anti-tank guns in concealed positions. The smart play would be to call for artillery, wait for air support, approach cautiously. Anderson ordered his driver forward at maximum speed. What happened next would be analyzed and debated by armor theorists for decades. The engagement lasted 7 minutes from first shot to last. When it ended, 3 German tanks were burning wrecks, an anti-tank gun was destroyed, and all 3 Churchills were still mobile despite taking multiple hits. Weber, positioned 1,500 yards distant with a perfect firing solution, had opened the engagement. His gunner Zimmermann put a 75mm armor-piercing round directly into the lead Churchill's hull at 1,400 yards. Perfect shot. Perfect angle. The kind of hit that would penetrate any Allied tank except maybe the American Sherman. Through his optics, Zimmermann watched the tracer streak across the open ground and strike the Churchill dead center. The impact sparked bright against the British tank's hull. The round ricocheted straight up, spinning away into the sky like a deflected stone. "What?" Zimmermann's voice was confused, almost plaintive. "That was a direct hit." Weber grabbed his own optics. The Churchill was still coming, apparently undamaged. If anything, it seemed to have accelerated, though at the Churchill's maximum speed of 15 miles per hour, acceleration was a relative term. "Hit it again," Weber ordered. "Same spot." Zimmermann fired. Another perfect hit. Another ricochet. The Churchill's driver didn't even bother to take evasive action. Why would he? The British tanker had just discovered what German intelligence had failed to report. At combat ranges, the Churchill's thick, cast armor was effectively immune to the Panzer IV's standard 75mm gun. Now the distance was down to 1,000 yards. The Churchills were spreading out, their commanders having spotted the German positions. Anderson's tank, the one that had absorbed Weber's shots without apparent damage, turned its turret with agonizing slowness toward the Panzer position. "They've seen us," Weber said unnecessarily. "Reverse! Get us into—" Anderson's Churchill fired. The 6-pounder gun wasn't as powerful as the German 75, but at 1,000 yards against the Panzer IV's thinner side armor, it was more than adequate. The British round punched through the German tank's turret ring, the weak point where turret met hull. Inside Weber's Panzer, the world exploded. The penetrating shot didn't detonate the ammunition, which would have vaporized the crew instantly. Instead, it ricocheted around the fighting compartment, destroying equipment and sending white-hot metal fragments in every direction. Zimmermann took shrapnel across his face and chest. The loader, whose name Weber never recorded, was killed instantly. Weber himself caught fragments in his left arm and shoulder. "Aus! Aus! Out!" Weber was screaming, shoving his wounded gunner toward the escape hatch, even as smoke filled the compartment. They tumbled out onto Tunisian soil, with flames already licking from the turret hatches. Behind them, the Panzer IV's ammunition finally cooked off, the explosion tearing the turret completely free of the hull. From the dubious safety of a nearby shell crater, Weber watched the rest of the engagement unfold. His 2 companion Panzers, positioned 300 yards to his left, had opened fire on the other Churchills. Both scored multiple hits. Both watched in disbelief as British tanks absorbed 75mm rounds that should have been lethal. The second Churchill, commanded by Lieutenant Peter Walsh, according to British after-action reports, took 4 direct hits in 90 seconds. 1 round struck the turret front. Another hit the hull front. A third caught the side armor at an angle. The 4th hit the tracks. Only the 4th shot did any damage, breaking 1 track and forcing Walsh's driver to halt. The other 3 rounds simply ricocheted or failed to penetrate. Walsh's gunner, Trooper James Mackenzie, returned fire almost casually, putting 2 6-pounder rounds into the nearest Panzer IV. Both penetrated. The German tank burned. The 3rd Panzer, commanded by a lieutenant whose name was never recorded, attempted to retreat. Anderson's Churchill caught it side-on at 800 yards, 1 shot through the engine compartment. The German crew bailed out, running for the olive grove as their tank leaked oil and coolant onto the dusty ground. 7 minutes. 3 Panzers destroyed or disabled. 3 Churchills still combat effective despite absorbing enough hits to destroy a squadron of lighter tanks. The mathematics of the engagement would be studied at armor schools for the rest of the war. But for Weber, sitting in a crater with blood soaking through his tunic, the mathematics meant something else entirely. Everything he'd been told about British tanks was wrong. Everything he'd believed about German armored superiority had just been demolished by 3 steel tractors. The Churchill tank's development represented British thinking about armored warfare at its most practical, and many argued, its most uninspired. While Germany pursued technological sophistication and America embraced mass production, Britain created a tank for the war it expected to fight. A grinding, attritional conflict against fortified positions. The design emerged from the disaster of Dunkirk. In 1940, Britain's armored forces had been mauled in France. Most tanks were abandoned on beaches or destroyed in rearguard actions. The nation faced potential invasion with almost no armored capability. The War Office issued urgent specifications for a heavy infantry tank. Thick armor, good cross-country performance, reliability over speed, and the ability to carry a useful gun. Vauxhall Motors received the contract. Their design team, led by Chief Engineer Kenneth Day, created something that looked like no other tank in any army. The hull was a long, rectangular box with vertical sides. The tracks extended the entire length, wrapping around the whole front and rear. The turret, mounting the main gun, sat high on the hull for maximum gun depression over obstacles. Conservative British military minds approved. Here was a tank that could do what the Great War's Mark tanks had done. Cross trenches, climb obstacles, breakthrough fortifications. The fact that it looked like a landship from 1918 didn't concern anyone. If the design worked in the trenches of the Somme, why wouldn't it work in the next war? The prototype rolled out in June 1941. Winston Churchill himself inspected it, and the tank was named in his honor. Production began immediately at multiple factories. By early 1942, Churchill tanks were reaching British armored regiments. The early models were disasters. The engine overheated. The gearbox failed constantly. The 6-pounder gun couldn't penetrate modern German armor. The tracks threw constantly. Crews despised them. One tank commander, whose report survives in the National Archives, wrote, "The Churchill is proof that a committee can design a tank. Unfortunately, that committee appears to have been composed entirely of idiots." After Dieppe, the Churchill nearly faced cancellation. Only intervention from Churchill himself, the man, not the tank, kept production running. "The tank bearing my name," the Prime Minister reportedly told the War Cabinet, "will not be remembered as a failure." Engineers worked frantically to fix the problems. The Mark III Churchill introduced a more powerful gun, a 75mm weapon adapted from the American Sherman. The Mark IV improved the transmission. The Mark VII, introduced in mid-1944, featured a redesigned hull with better armor arrangement. But even the early troublesome Marks had one overwhelming advantage. They were nearly indestructible. The thick armor, positioned badly by theoretical standards, proved remarkably effective in practice. The cast hull absorbed punishment that would shatter welded construction. The long track base distributed weight so effectively that Churchills could traverse ground that bogged down supposedly superior tanks. In North Africa, where Weber's Panzer met its match, Churchills with the 6th Armored Division were proving all the doubters wrong. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Huth, commanding the Churchill-equipped North Irish Horse, submitted a report in June 1943 that reads like a love letter to an ugly tank. "The Churchill is slower than the Sherman," Huth wrote. "It lacks the Cromwell's speed and the firepower of the American tank. In a race across open ground, any German tank will reach the objective first. But races don't win battles. The Churchill wins battles because it arrives at the objective, absorbs whatever the enemy throws at it, and then systematically destroys everything that tried to stop it. Our casualties in the past month are 1/3 those of comparable Sherman units. The men trust this tank. They know it will bring them home." German intelligence, receiving reports of Churchill effectiveness from the Africa Corps, initially dismissed them as exaggeration or excuse-making. How could a tank that looked so obsolete be effective? The photographs showed vertical armor, surely a critical weakness. The speed trial showed pathetic performance. The specifications showed inadequate main armament. But the combat reports kept coming. Churchills absorbing multiple hits. Churchills climbing hills that stopped Panzer IVs. Churchills operating in terrain that bogged down Tigers. Something was wrong with the German analysis, but pride and institutional momentum prevented acknowledgement. It took the Italian campaign to force recognition. September 9th, 1943. Salerno, Italy. The 16th Panzer Division counterattacked the Allied beachhead with 2 full tank battalions. Among the defenders were Churchills of the North Irish Horse and the 3 RTR, Royal Tank Regiment. The battle lasted 3 days and became a case study in how terrain, tactics, and tank design interact. Italy was Churchill country. The narrow valleys, steep hills, and soft ground favored a slow, heavily armored tank over faster but lighter designs. Shermans bogged down in the volcanic soil. German tanks struggled to climb the terraced hillsides. Churchills just kept moving, their wide tracks and powerful engines grinding forward regardless of gradient or ground condition. Oberstleutnant Heinrich Freiherr von Liebenstein commanded the 67th Panzer Battalion in the counterattack. His after-action report, captured when he was wounded and taken prisoner 3 days later, provides extraordinary detail about German perceptions changing in real time. We encountered British Churchill tanks in strength on September 11th, von Liebenstein wrote. Initial engagement at 1,400 meters resulted in multiple hits on enemy tanks with no apparent effect. Panthers and Mark IVs both reported armor-piercing rounds ricocheting from Churchill front and side armor. As range closed to under 1,000 meters, British tanks began achieving penetrations against our vehicles. The report continues for 7 pages, documenting engagement after engagement, where Churchills absorbed punishment and returned effective fire. Von Liebenstein's tone shifts from confident to concerned, to almost desperate by the final pages. The British tank is slower than our Panzers, but this matters less in Italian terrain than in open desert, he concluded. More significantly, the Churchill appears virtually immune to our standard ammunition at ranges beyond 800 meters. We achieved kills only through side shots at close range or by use of 88mm anti-tank guns. Our own losses were unacceptable. Of 41 tanks committed, 23 were destroyed or disabled. British losses: 9 Churchills, 6 of which were recovered and returned to service. I must conclude that previous intelligence assessments of this vehicle were inaccurate. Stories began filtering through the German army of Churchill invincibility, a tank that took 7 hits from a Panther and kept fighting. A Churchill that belly-flopped into a bomb crater, climbed out using its nose as a ramp, and rejoined the battle. A single Churchill holding a mountain pass against an entire German company for 6 hours while absorbing dozens of hits. Some stories were exaggerated. Many were substantially true. The Churchill's reputation grew with each engagement. Gefreiter Ernst Müller, a Panzer crewman captured at Cassino in January 1944, told British interrogators, "We stopped joking about British tractors after Salerno. The Churchill is a tank we learned to fear, not because it's fast or powerful, but because you cannot kill it. You hit it. It keeps coming. You hit it again. It still comes. Meanwhile, it's shooting back, and one hit from that gun will kill your tank. It's psychological. You see a Churchill, and you know you're in for a fight that might not end well." The transformation of German opinion reached its peak during the Normandy campaign. Here, in the hedgerows and narrow lanes of northern France, the Churchill found its perfect battlefield. June 10, 1944. Villers-Bocage, Normandy. This battle became infamous for Tiger ace Michael Wittmann's destruction of British Cromwell and Sherman tanks. Less well known is what happened when Wittmann encountered Churchills. Major Bill Close, commanding a squadron of Churchill tanks from the 1st Royal Tank Regiment, arrived at Villers-Bocage several hours after Wittmann's ambush. His tanks moved cautiously through the town, aware that German heavies were in the area. Close's own Churchill, named Bob, led the column. Wittmann, his Tiger, having withdrawn to rearm and refuel, returned to find British tanks in the town he'd cleared hours earlier. He positioned his Tiger in a covered position and engaged Close's lead. Churchill from 600 yards. The 88mm gun spoke once. The round hit Close's tank square in the turret front. Inside Bob, the impact sounded like God's hammer striking an anvil. The tank shuddered. Fragments of spalled armor ricocheted around the fighting compartment, wounding Close's loader. But the main armor held. The round had been deflected by the Churchill's thick, rounded turret mantlet, the armored shield around the gun. Close immediately reversed into cover, ordering his other Churchills to fan out. Wittmann fired twice more, hitting different Churchills each time. Both rounds failed to penetrate. The Tiger's legendary 88mm gun, capable of destroying any other Allied tank at 2,000 yards, could not punch through Churchill armor at 600. The battle devolved into a stalking match through ruined buildings. Wittmann, recognizing that his ammunition was being wasted, withdrew. Close as Churchill's held the town. 3 tanks had been hit. None were penetrated. None were disabled. It was a tactical draw that felt like a moral victory. British tanks had faced the Tiger and survived. Close's after-action report is preserved in the Tank Museum archives at Bovington. His assessment of the Churchill: slow as a coal barge, handles like a bus. But when Jerry shoots at you, there's no tank you'd rather be in. The armor is magnificent. The Churchill's finest hour came during the Rhine crossing operations in early 1945. By this point, the tank had evolved through 7 major variants. The Mark VII, equipped with a capable 75mm gun and improved armor, was among the best protected tanks in any army. March 23, 1945. The Rhine River, Wesel. Churchill tanks of the 15th Scottish Division, 6th Guards Tank Brigade, and other units provided support for the massive river crossing operation. German defenders, including the best remaining Panzer units, fought desperately to contain the bridgehead. Hauptmann Rudolf von Ribbentrop, son of the Nazi foreign minister and a battalion commander in the SS Panzer Corps, faced Churchill tanks repeatedly during the Rhine battles. His memoir, published in the 1970s, provides a remarkable German perspective. The British Churchill was the tank we least wanted to face in defensive warfare, von Ribbentrop wrote. The Tiger could destroy it at long range if we had Tigers and ammunition for them. The Panther could sometimes penetrate its armor. But by early 45, we had few Tigers and fewer Panthers. We had Mark IVs, assault guns, and desperation. The Churchill excelled in exactly the warfare we now fought: close-range battles in built-up areas, advances through broken terrain, attacks on fortified positions. Its armor made it nearly invulnerable to our infantry anti-tank weapons. Panzerfausts that would destroy a Sherman bounced off Churchill armor unless you achieved a perfect 90-degree hit. The tank's ability to climb obstacles meant it could appear anywhere. You'd prepare positions against conventional tanks, and Churchills would simply climb over obstacles you thought impassable. Von Ribbentrop described an engagement near Xanten, where a single Churchill tank held off his entire company for 4 hours. We hit it repeatedly with Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks. The tank showed obvious damage. Tracks were damaged, smoke poured from engine vents. The gun mantlet was scarred from multiple hits. But it continued firing, methodically destroying our positions one by one. When we finally disabled it by hitting the same track twice in the same spot, the crew simply abandoned it, carried their wounded to safety, and the tank was recovered and repaired within a day. That was the Churchill's great strength, von Ribbentrop concluded. Not speed or firepower, but relentless durability. You could damage it. You could slow it. But you couldn't easily kill it, and killing it was what mattered. The statistics support von Ribbentrop's assessment. Churchill operational loss rates, tanks destroyed beyond recovery, were among the lowest of any tank type in British service. A study by the British War Office in 1946 found that Churchills required an average of 6.2 hits by German anti-tank weapons to achieve total destruction. Sherman's averaged 3.8 hits. Cromwell's averaged 3.1 hits. The Churchill survival rate meant experienced crews stayed alive longer, gaining combat experience that made them more effective. Many Churchill crews served together from Normandy to Germany, an almost unheard-of accomplishment in armored warfare. Trooper Peter Roach, a Churchill gunner who fought from Normandy to the Baltic, survived the entire campaign without being forced to abandon his tank. His oral history, recorded in 1993 and held at the Imperial War Museum, captures the crew's affection for their vehicle. "We called her the Kettle because she was slow to boil but impossible to crack," Roach remembered. "She wasn't pretty. She wasn't fast. The Americans in their Shermans would roar past us, laughing at how slow we were. Then they'd get hit, and their tanks would brew up, catch fire, and we'd lumber past them. Our tank might be on fire too, but we'd still be moving, still fighting. I remember crossing into Germany. We'd been hit so many times the hull armor looked like a golf ball, all pockmarked from deflected rounds. The engine smoked constantly. The gearbox ground horribly. But she kept going. The driver used to pat the hull and say, "Good girl," every time we survived another hit. We all did, actually. You develop affection for a machine that keeps saving your life. German tank designers studied captured Churchills with growing respect. Reports from the Waffenamt, the Weapons Procurement Office, show the evolution of German thinking about the British tank. A July 1944 technical assessment concluded, "The Churchill represents outdated design philosophy executed to exceptional standard." While we would not adopt its configuration, we must acknowledge that thick, simple armor is more effective than complex, sloped armor that cannot be manufactured to adequate thickness due to industrial limitations. The British tank survives through brute force. Given their industrial capacity, this is sufficient. This was as close to admission of error as German engineering pride would allow. The Churchill worked because Britain built it to work, accepting compromises in other areas to achieve exceptional armor protection. In the attritional warfare of 1944 and 45, that trade-off proved correct. By war's end, 5,640 Churchills had been built. They served in every British theater, Africa, Italy, Northwest Europe, even a handful in Burma. Approximately 1,400 were lost to all causes, a remarkably low attrition rate for a tank that spent the entire war in frontline service. German records, incomplete but substantial, document over 4,200 claims against Churchill tanks by all German anti-tank weapons combined. Of these, only 1,100 were confirmed as total write-offs. The remainder were damaged, but recovered, repaired, and returned to service. No other Allied tank achieved comparable survivability. The Churchill spawned numerous specialist variants, each exploiting the chassis' inherent durability. The AVRE, Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, carried a massive mortar for destroying fortifications. Churchill bridge layers could span a 30-foot gap. The Crocodile flamethrower variant was perhaps the most feared weapon in the British arsenal, coupling a flamethrower with the Churchill's heavy armor to create an unstoppable terror weapon. German troops learned to recognize Churchill variants by silhouette. An OVRE meant fortifications would be destroyed. A Crocodile meant bunkers would be burned out. A standard gun tank meant a tough fight ahead. Gefreiter Hans Schiller, interviewed in 1983 for a British television documentary on tank warfare, provided a German private's perspective on facing Churchills in the final months of the war. By early 45, we were told that new wonder weapons would save the Reich, Schiller recalled. Jet planes, new tanks, secret rockets. Meanwhile, we crouched in frozen foxholes with Panzerfausts and prayed we wouldn't have to face British tanks. Not because we lacked courage, but because courage doesn't matter when the enemy tank ignores your weapon. I remember a Churchill coming directly at our position near Cleve. We were infantry, equipped with 3 Panzerfausts between 6 men. The tank was perhaps 200 meters away, moving slowly through the ruins. Our sergeant, a veteran of Russia, decided to wait until it was closer, 50 meters or less, to ensure a kill. We waited. The Churchill kept coming, its gun traversing back and forth, searching for targets. At 75 meters, our sergeant rose to fire. The Churchill's hull machine gun cut him down before he could aim. We stayed hidden, letting the tank pass over our foxholes. It was terrifying. 40 tons of steel moving over you, tracks rattling beside your head, certain that it would collapse the earth and bury you alive. But it passed over and continued down the street. We lived because we chose not to fight. That was what the Churchill did to us by war's end, made us choose survival over resistance. These psychological effects multiplied as German forces disintegrated. A tank that couldn't be easily killed became, in soldiers' minds, a tank that couldn't be killed at all. This perception, though not literally true, had strategic effects out of proportion to the Churchill's actual battlefield impact. Major General Fritz Bayerlein, who commanded the Panzer Lehr Division at Normandy, later assessed Allied armor strength for American interrogators. His comments on the Churchill: "The British tank was tactically inferior to our Panthers and Tigers, but strategically superior because it was there, reliably, in numbers we could not match. A technically perfect tank that breaks down is worthless. A reliable tank with adequate armor and armament is worth a dozen paper Tigers. The Churchill was reliable. This reliability extended beyond mere mechanical function. British tank crews knew their Churchills would protect them, would absorb punishment, would bring them home. This confidence translated to more aggressive tactics, better crew performance, and ultimately more effective combat operations. The Churchill's legacy extended long past 1945. The tank remained in British service until 1952, fighting in Korea, where its climbing ability proved ideal for mountainous terrain. The Irish Army operated Churchills until 1969. Some specialist variants served even longer. Churchill Bridgelayers remained in British Army inventory until 1993, a 52-year service life unprecedented for any tank design. The Tank Museum at Bovington holds 15 different Churchill variants in its collection, more than any other single tank type. Each tells a story. Battle damage repaired and repaired again. Modifications added in field workshops. Personal touches from crews who depended on these machines for survival. Perhaps the most famous Churchill is the Mark VII on display at Bovington. Registration number T3-4A-4. This particular tank landed at Normandy on June 7, 1944. It fought across France, through Belgium and the Netherlands, and into Germany. The hull shows evidence of at least 23 separate hits from various German weapons. Not one penetrated. The tank's commander for most of its service life was Sergeant Bill Close, the same officer who'd faced Whitman's Tiger at Villers-Bocage. After the war, Close became a teacher in Seawide, Hertfordshire. He visited his old Churchill regularly at Bovington, bringing his students to explain why the slow, ugly tank had been the best in the world at keeping him alive. The Germans called it a tractor, Close told one such student group in 1978, his hand resting affectionately on the scarred hull armor. They laughed at it when they first saw one. They stopped laughing after they tried to kill it. Speed doesn't matter if you're dead. Looks don't matter if you're dead. The Churchill understood what tank warfare really was. Not a race or a beauty contest, but a slugging match where the last tank standing wins. And we were always the last tank standing. Friedrich Weber, the Panzer commander who'd mocked the Churchill that May Day in Tunisia, and then watched his tank burn after the British tractor shot back, also survived the war. Released from British captivity in 1947, he returned to Germany and eventually became an automotive engineer. In 1981, he attended a tank warfare symposium in Munich, where veterans from both sides shared experiences. Meeting Major Anderson, by then Sir John Anderson, retired and living in Belfast, Weber asked the question that had haunted him for 38 years. How? We hit your tank twice. Center mass. Perfect shots. How did you survive? Anderson, according to witnesses, smiled and offered the German veteran a drink. You assumed your gun would penetrate our armor, because it always had before. You assumed thick armor on a slow tank meant weak design. You assumed wrong on both counts. The Churchill was exactly what we needed it to be, a tank that protected its crew above all else. Your shells bounced because we built a tank that could bounce them. Simple as that. Weber raised his glass in salute. It was the finest tractor I ever saw, he said with a smile. They both laughed. The room full of old tankers, British and German together, joined in. Everyone understood the joke. Everyone understood what the laughter really meant. Respect for a machine that had performed its function perfectly, despite looking like it had no right to exist. The Churchill tank demonstrated that in warfare, as in life, appearances deceive. The slow, tall, ungainly machine that looked like a refugee from the First World War proved more survivable than sleeker, faster, more modern designs. The gun that seemed inadequate achieved its purpose. The armor that looked primitive protected better than advanced, sloped designs. Most significantly, the Churchill proved that successful weapons design requires understanding the mission before pursuing the technology. Britain needed a tank to support infantry, break fortifications, absorb punishment, and keep crews alive. The Churchill did precisely that, better than any other tank of its era. The Germans mocked it as a steel tractor. They stopped mocking after it destroyed their Panzers. They stopped completely when they realized the tractor was winning. And in the end, that's what matters. Not how impressive your weapon looks, but whether it accomplishes the mission and brings soldiers home alive. The Churchill accomplished both, reliably for the entire war. Friedrich Weber learned that lesson watching 3 ugly British tanks demolish his company in 7 minutes on a dusty Tunisian plain. Every German tanker who faced the Churchill afterward learned the same truth. Never judge a tank by its appearance. Judge it by whether it's still moving forward after you've shot it 3 times. The Churchill was always still moving forward. That's why the British crews loved it. That's why German crews feared it. And that's why, decades after the last Churchill fired its last shot, veterans from both sides could gather in Munich and share drinks and stories about the tank that looked like a tractor, but fought like a tiger, protected like a fortress, and never, ever quit. In the end, that was the Churchill's greatest achievement, not destroying German tanks, though it did that well enough. Its greatest achievement was bringing British tank crews home alive, mission after mission, battle after battle, right through to the war's end. 5,400 men served in Churchill crews. The vast majority survived. That's not a statistic any other tank type could match. The Germans called it a steel tractor. The British called it a lifesaver. History called it one of the war's most effective tanks. All 3 were right. And somewhere in that unlikely intersection of mockery, affection, and proven effectiveness lies the truth about the Churchill. It was exactly what Britain needed, exactly when Britain needed it. Nothing more, nothing less, but absolutely enough.